You will hear a tour guide speaking to a group of tourists who are visiting a part of New Zealand called Rotorua. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. In the exam, you would have 30 seconds to look at the questions. Pause the recording for 30 seconds now. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Hello everyone, and I'd like to welcome you all to Rotorua, one of the most famous destinations in New Zealand, where we have a long history of welcoming visitors. I'd like to explain a bit about the geography of this amazing region, famous for its geothermal activity, and tell you what we've planned for your stay. Well, if you'd like to have a look at the map of the region that's in your welcome pack, if you find Lake Rotorua on the top left, the big triangular lake, we've just driven down along State Highway 5, SH5, down the western side of the lake, and then we turned off through the town, and we're here at the Lakes Motel just around the southern tip of the lake, okay? Now tomorrow we'll be heading off along SH30 in the opposite direction from the town, towards Lake Rotoita, where we'll be visiting the Hells Gate Thermal Reserve. This is the area between the SH30 road and the lake, and I'll be telling you more about this in a minute. We'll then be returning to the motel, and in the afternoon we'll be visiting the town of Rotorua itself and also the Arts and Crafts Institute, which is just along the SH30 from the motel where it meets the SH5 outside the town. Now if you look directly out of the motel towards the southeast, in the opposite direction to Lake Rotorua, you can just see the peak of Mount Tarawera, and the day after tomorrow we'll be visiting the volcanic valley which was formed when this last erupted. We'll drive down the SH5 and then head off towards Lake Rotomahana. The valley's on the opposite side of the lake from the mountain, so you can see what a powerful effect the eruption had. There's also an interesting archaeological site, a village buried by the same eruption on the western shores of Lake Tarawera, just to the north, but I'm afraid we won't have time to visit that as a group, although you may wish to go there on your own. However, on the way back towards Rotorua along the SH5, we'll be stopping at Tamaki village, which is on the main road about 12 kilometres outside town.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. In the exam, you would have 25 seconds to look at the questions. Pause the recording for 25 seconds now. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
So now let me tell you a bit more about these attractions. Just driving past the lake and through the town, I'm sure you've realised this is somewhere quite different from anywhere else in the world. So tomorrow, we'll start by visiting Hells Gate Thermal Reserve. This is the most active area of the region volcanically, and you'll see New Zealand's largest boiling whirlpool, where the water is actually 100 degrees centigrade, together with the largest hot waterfall in the southern hemisphere, where it's a more comfortable 40 degrees centigrade, just right for a hot shower. Entry is just $12 for adults and $6 for children. We'll come back to the motel for lunch, after which we'll visit the Arts and Crafts Institute, where you can learn about Maori people who lived here before the Europeans came. There's a display of Maori carving, showing this traditional skill at its most impressive, and exhibitions where you can learn about the use of geothermal waters for cooking food and for medicinal purposes. Entry is free and you'll find plenty to do there for the whole afternoon. The following day we'll be visiting another highlight of the region, the Volcanic Valley. This is a very new part of New Zealand. The valley was formed less than 150 years ago in 1886 when Mount Tarawera erupted violently, completely destroying the beautiful pink and white terraces that used to attract tourists to the region. After lunch you can take a boat trip to see the volcanic activity at the edge of the lake. That's $25 for adults and $5 for children. We'll then be spending the afternoon learning more about traditional Maori life and pre-European New Zealand at Tamaki village. As you walk around this recreated village, your Maori guide will tell you more about this traditional culture, and as the sun sets, you can enjoy a traditionally cooked feast known as the hangi, that's Hangi, consisting of meat and vegetables cooked over hot stones, which are placed in a hole in the ground and covered with earth. And there's no extra charge for this. It's all included in the basic cost of your holiday. Now, does anyone have any questions?
That is the end of section 1. You now have some time to check your answers. Now turn to section 2. Section 2. You're going to hear a reporter from the New York Times who is presenting a news report prepared by Dion Searcy and Robert Gebeloff on the topic Middle Class Shrinks, further as more fallout instead of climbing up. First look at questions 11 to 13. Now listen to the recording and answer questions 11 to 13.
The middle class that President Obama identified in his State of the Union speech last week as the foundation of the American economy has been shrinking for almost half a century. In the late 1960s, more than half of the households in the United States were squarely in the middle, earning, in today's dollars, $35,000 to $100,000 a year. Few people noticed or cared as the size of that group began to fall, because the shift was primarily caused by more Americans climbing the economic ladder into upper income brackets. But since 2000, the middle class's share of households has continued to narrow, the main reason being that more people have fallen to the bottom. At the same time, fewer of those in this group fit the traditional image of a married couple with children at home, a gap increasingly filled by the elderly. This social upheaval helps explain why the president focused on reviving the middle class, offering a raft of proposals squarely aimed at concerns like paying for college education, taking parental leave, affording childcare, and buying a home.
Now look at questions 14 to 21. As the talk continues, answer questions 14 to 21.
Middle-class economics means helping working families feel more secure in a world of constant change, Mr. Obama told Congress and the public. Still, regardless of their income, most Americans are identified as middle class. The term itself is so amorphous that politicians often cite the group in introducing proposals to engender wide appeal. The definition here starts at $35,000, which is about 50% higher than the official poverty level for a family of 4 and ends at the six-figure mark. Although many Americans in households making more than $100,000 consider themselves middle class, particularly those living in expensive regions like the Northeast and Pacific Coast, they have substantially more money than most people. However, the lines are drawn. It is clear that millions are struggling to hang on to accoutrement that most experts consider essential to a middle-class life. I would consider middle class to be people who can live comfortably on what they earn, can pay their bills, can set aside something to save for retirement and for kids in college, and can have vacations and entertainment, said Christine L. Owens, Executive Director of the National Employment Law Project, a left learning research and advocacy group.
That is the end of section 2. You will now have some time to check your answers.
Section 3. You will hear two students, Ramil and Kirsten, discussing presenting a paper at an architecture conference. You now have 30 seconds to read questions 21 to 28.
Hi, Kirsten. Have you heard about that architecture conference in Oxford at the end of the year?
Yeah, I saw the leaflet on the notice board. As it's my final year, I ought to try giving a paper, but I've got no idea how to go about it.
Oh, I think you should go for it. I did one last year. It's quite straightforward. First of all, you need to see what the conference themes are. You know, what topics they're covering. You can do that by looking it up on the website. You need to submit a paper that falls into one of the categories they give you.
Oh, that may give me some ideas.
Then, while you're doing that, you should also have a look at the information on how to submit your paper. The rules, if you like, such as the length. It's important you follow those.
I see. And then I suppose the next stage is to start writing it up. I'd like to use it as an opportunity to propose some future work, but I understand it must be based on current work. Still, there's plenty to choose from. It makes sense to do something that I'm more familiar with.
Yes, and the other thing is, when you've written it up, then go back and look at your data carefully and make certain that you've presented it in a format that is standard for your subject. Remember, people have to absorb information very quickly while they're listening. Don't make it too complicated.
Okay, well, I reckon that'll take me about a month to get that sorted. Then the next thing I have to do, I guess, before I send it off to the conference organizer, is give the whole thing to the events officer so that he can look through it and see if it all makes sense and is okay.
Yeah. Remember to warn him that it's en route so he can fit it into his schedule.
Oh.
Then you're done, really. All you have to do after that is to go through it and sort out any changes you need to make. Then finally, you can submit it. You can do that online.
Phew, good. Then I just wait to hear, I suppose. How long does that take?
It depends, but usually about 6 weeks.
Oh.
When you hear if your paper has been accepted, then at that stage, it's worth giving them a list of any technical things you need when you actually give the talk. A screen or video players or that sort of thing.
Okay, but that's a long way off. And I know that if my paper is accepted, then at that stage, I have to give them a short text about myself and my academic background so that they can put it in the brochure. Famous at last.
Yeah.
You now have 15 seconds to read questions 29 to 30.
Right, well, I've got to get a couple of things sorted if I'm going to get this paper completed.
Have you got enough data?
Possibly. I'd like to reinforce some of it, though, so I thought I'd send out some more questionnaires. I was looking at that thesis that Angela wrote last year, and she said you need a sample of over 100 to be sure of your results.
I think some of this year's postgraduates are doing some of the same stuff as you on buildings. Why don't you talk to them?
I'll end up getting confused. It would be more useful for me to actually go out to that site by the rail bridge to see how they're building the new factory.
Oh.
I managed to get hold of Professor Barnett at London University, and he said I should go out and take pictures. I'm pretty busy, but I'll have to make time. Anyway, what about you? What are your plans?
Now turn to Section 4. Test 2, Section 4. You will hear a woman giving a talk at a popular science convention. She is describing research into artificial gills designed to enable humans to breathe underwater. Now you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 31 to 40.
In my talk today, I'll be exploring the idea of artificial gills. I'll start by introducing the concept, giving some background and so forth, and then I'll go on to explain the technological applications, including a short, very simple experiment I conducted. Starting with the background. As everyone knows, all living creatures need oxygen to live. Mammals take in oxygen from the atmosphere by using their lungs, and fishes take oxygen from water by means of their gills, which of course in most fishes are located either side of their head. But human beings have always dreamt of being able to swim underwater like the fishes, breathing without the help of oxygen tanks. I don't know whether any of you have done any scuba diving, but it's a real pain having to use all that equipment. You need special training, and it's generally agreed that tanks are too heavy and big to enable most people to move and work comfortably underwater. So scientists are trying a different tack. Rather than humans carrying an oxygen supply as they go underwater, wouldn't it be possible to extract oxygen in situ? That is, directly from the water while swimming. In the 1960s, the famous underwater explorer Jacques Cousteau, for example, predicted that one day surgery could be used to equip humans with gills. He believed our lungs could be bypassed and we would learn to live underwater just as naturally as we live on land. But of course, most of us would prefer not to go to such extremes. I've been looking at some fairly simple technologies developed to extract oxygen from water, ways to produce a simple, practical artificial gill, enabling humans to live and breathe in water without harm. Now, how scientists and inventors went about this was to look at the way different animals handled this. Fairly obviously, they looked at the way fishes breathe, but also how they move down and float up to the surface using inflatable sacs called swim bladders. Scientists also looked at animals without gills, which use bubbles of air underwater, notably beetles. These insects contrive to stay underwater for long periods by breathing from this bubble which they hold under their wing cases. By looking at these animal adaptations, inventors began to come up with their own artificial gills. Now, making a crude gill is actually rather easy, more straightforward. You take a watertight box, which is made of a material which is permeable to gas, that is, it allows it to pass through inwards and outwards. You then fill this with air, fix it to the diver's face, and go down underwater. But a crucial factor is that the diver has to keep the water moving so that water high in oxygen is always in contact with the gill, so he can't really stay still. And to maximize this contact, it's necessary for your gill to have a big surface area. Different gill designers have addressed this problem in different ways, but many choose to use a network or lattice arrangement of tiny tubes as part of their artificial gills. Then the diver is able to breathe in and out. Oxygen from the water passes through the outer walls of the gill, and carbon dioxide is expelled. In a nutshell, that's how the artificial gill works. So, having read about these simple gill mechanisms, I decided to create my own. I followed the procedure I've just described, and it worked pretty well when I tried it out in the swimming pool. I lasted underwater for nearly 40 minutes. However, I've read about other people breathing through their gill for several hours. So the basic idea works well, but the real limitation is that these simple gills don't work as the diver descends to any great depth because the pressure builds and a whole different set of problems are caused by that. Research is being done into how these problems might be overcome, but that's another story, which has to be a subject of another talk. Despite this serious limitation, many people have high hopes for the artificial gill, and they think it might have applications beyond simply enabling an individual to stay underwater for a length of time. For example, the same technology might be used to provide oxygen for submarines, enabling them to stay submerged for months on end without resorting to potentially dangerous technologies such as nuclear power. Another idea is to use oxygen derived from the water as energy for fuel cells. These could power machinery underwater, such as robotic devices. So, in my view, this is an area of technology with great potential. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yes, lady at the...
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.